During my investigation into Antarctica, there has been a historical connection that I've been attempting to make that until recently I have been unable to. If you make the allegation that at one time this continent was populated and had civilization and culture, it would have had to have been seafaring. And places like New Zealand and South America would have some connection through their common trade partners in what we know to be today Antarctica. Now, recently, a very interesting story has come out of New Zealand. They're attempting to rename the country. The local indigenous population, known as the Maori, are attempting to revert the name back to what it was originally called, and I hope I can pronounce this properly, Aotearoa. They want to return many of the locations and their names to how they were referred to by the original inhabitants. Now, that's going to be something for the people of New Zealand to decide for themselves. But in the investigation of this, I found something that explains an image on a map that we've seen from South America that, to me, just doesn't make any sense, or didn't make any sense until now. This is a map from the 1600s. It shows what looks like the uncovering of a giant, a skeleton, laying here. Now, there's some very interesting imagery around it. We have a man over here, and he's carrying a weapon over his shoulder, what appears to be some type of a weapon. There are two men that look like they're displacing the rocks, but right above this skeleton, there are two other individuals. One has his arms out, and the other is holding in his hands what looks to be a skull. Now, on the skeleton down here, the skull is in place. So where would this have come from, and what did this represent? Well, believe it or not, now remember, this map is from, I believe it's a Porto Desire on the Argentinian coast. This idea of the man holding a head is connected to Maori culture. They used to trade mummified heads for weapons in the 19th century. Now, they have been attempting to repatriate these and get them back and get them out of museums. But that's right here. The Maori, let me zoom back out. Hold on. The Maori preserved heads that were used in sacred ceremonies, but also as trade items to purchase weapons. Moko Mokai, the Maori preserved heads, are one of the most valuable artifacts of the indigenous people of New Zealand that survive to this day. Their preserved heads, with faces decorated by tattooing, became valuable trade items during the musket wars of the early 19th century. Now, when you look at this image, and I'll zoom it back in here, this is as close as I can get it. This very much looks like what's going on. This guy here is attempting to make a deal for this head to trade for perhaps this weapon. In fact, there's even another image I have of giants making deals with humans for weapons. This guy has in his left hand a halberd, and these guys have these giant bows, and it looks like they're attempting to make some type of a deal. This is another image from Patagonia. When you add in also this image from Antarctica, which very much resembles a head from Easter Island, it puts all of the pieces together. That there was a common thread that ran from South America, Argentina, Chile, through a civilized seafaring Antarctica that traveled as far as New Zealand. Now, another very strange article has come out, and this is 10 October. Capsule of 1765 air reveals ancient histories hidden under Antarctica ice. Polar Zero exhibition in Glasgow features sculpture encasing air extracted, from start of Industrial Revolution. An ampule of Antarctic air from the year 1765 forms the centerpiece of a new exhibition that reveals the hidden histories contained in polar ice to visitors attending the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow. Now wait until you hear what they say here. I had to read it a bunch of times to see if I was not just reading it improperly. Now here's where they start in with the whole climate change thing. The Polar Zero exhibition at the Glasgow Science Centre features a cylindrical glass sculpture encasing the air, extracted precisely from 1765, the date that many historians pinpoint as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. A second cylinder presents an ice core containing tiny bubbles of air that were trapped as snow fell and compacted, and which now reveal the horrifying rate of increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide since that date. Now here's a quote. The scale of the topic is so overwhelming and so complex that it can feel distant, even apocalyptic, says Beniti, an Arts and Humanities Research Council-funded PhD student at the Royal College of Art. Quote, people need something tangible to get a hold of that collapses that distance. The glaciologist, Dr. Robert Mulvaney, who was responsible for mining the ice for the British Antarctic Survey, says, it is indeed possible to drill out ice from a particular era. Quote, now you ready for this? Snow falls in Antarctica year by year, but there's no melting going on. So the snow builds up and compresses all the years of snow beneath. As we drill down, we're driving further and further into the past, a bit like counting the rings of a big tree. Wait, what? There's no melting going on? There's no melting going on. And then, as if they didn't even listen to what they just said, they come back with what helps is that every so often, we know that a certain volcano blew up, as an example, in a particular year, when we may find evidence of that. So using our drills to find a specific year isn't quite as hard as you would imagine. It's like counting rings on a tree, apparently. But this makes a lot of assumptions, and given based on what they said, how would they know that maybe a 2 or 3 year anomaly year didn't happen? Or 4-year anomaly year didn't happen? And what ties this to the Maori is researchers link 700-year-old soot found in Antarctica to fires set by early Maori. An overseas research team, and this is 8 October, has linked soot preserved in Antarctic ice to fires set in Aotearoa by Maori settlers 700 years ago. So they set fires in New Zealand, and the soot floated over to Antarctica. And the Maori aren't too happy about this article because they're trying to blame somehow now 1300s era Maori for some type of contamination. And they cover that here. In comments published by the Science Media Center, University of Waikato, acting dean of the Faculty of Maori and Indigenous Studies, Associate Professor Sandy Morrison, said the study was devoid of context, devoid of cultural understandings, and is yet another example of what we have grown to expect from Western science. It relies on measurements, modeling, and silo thinking, and the paper, whether intentional or not, posits Maori as naughty offenders. Moreover, it reeks of scientific arrogance, with its implicit assumption that somehow Maori have a lot to account for in terms of contributing to carbon emissions and destroying the pristine environment of the southern oceans and Antarctica. It's just bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. But the big takeaway, we have the connection between New Zealand, the Maori, and South America. It's Antarctica. And up until this point, I haven't been able to find any real connection. Because there would have had to have been. I mean, it wouldn't have been, when you go along the coast here, you can see port after port after port after port after port. And all sorts of different places where there would have been easy access for civilization. We've shown one that looks like basically the footprint of Manhattan. So there would have been trade here and here. And I think, and I've said this before, there's a history of this written down somewhere. Because we showed this before. This is a reference to Game of Thrones, the series from HBO. The map you're looking at on your right is allegedly the fictional land of Westeros and Essos. Here's the Great Frozen North. Here's Dorne. Here's basically where most of the story takes place. And then these kind of lost lands over here. You have this narrow sea, the Summer Sea. All you have to do, and on the left, all I did was flip around Argentina and the Antarctic Peninsula. And when you flip this around this way, it looks identical, other than this giant flood that came through, which we covered in yet another video. So, also, the great evil Night King in Game of Thrones looks really eerily identical to a Maori carving that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. So, anyway, but I'll leave it there. But I think we have a smoking gun for this map. It was a trade deal. I'll leave it there. God bless, like, share, subscribe, and we will see you guys next time.